Hello YouTube, welcome back for another financial modeling video. We're going to spend today's video looking at a financial modeling technique rather than necessarily look at specific line items and how they're modeled. This is a broader technique that gets used a lot, and then we're again going to do the traditional way that we look at it, and we try and look at the layers of how this technique might be leveraged or used. So what we're looking at is a waterfall of profiles. So the most common way you might see it is something like depreciation, where especially straight line depreciation, where if you take a number for CapEx, so I buy a motor vehicle or office equipment, say a motor vehicle for 50,000, and we're going to use that motor vehicle for 5 years, so we're going to depreciate it or recognize its useful life over 5 years. We on a straight line basis, we would take 20, so 1 divided by 5, so 20% off the value of that asset every year. And so 10 grand in that specific 50 grand example would get depreciated every year. And if you're only looking at a single asset in a single year, pretty easy to do. But then it starts getting complicated if you add more assets with the same useful life. But then on top of it, it gets even further complicated if you add different useful life assets. And then on top of that, if you get different useful lives assets over time, many layers. So the technique we'll start with is just purely building out a waterfall. We're going to build it in 3 layers of complexity. So the first one is just typing in amounts, how we can do that, how we can set that out in a model like this, like a blank model using Medano. So we'll do it as a basic, so people that don't have Medano can also follow along. And then we will also do a separate example where we touch on how to automate some of that. So we commonly like to look at amounts, so just manual calculations and keying the amounts in, or having calculations occur separately and then bringing the amounts into the model. Separately, the second one is automating some of those calculations. So that's the first step of customizing your amounts. And then the last layer is looking at building, and this is specific to Medano, something like modules as categories, where we can split out how the profiling works. And then the layer on top of all of that would be something like looking at reverse ticker. As far as I understand, reverse ticker was pioneered by BPM, or currently Medano. So the team there came up with the formulation behind how the reverse ticker works using offset formulas. Quite ingenious. We prefer to use index to achieve the same outcome, and it's more just we don't like using volatile functions, but it's still an awesome technique to understand. So we'll cover it in these videos. So the first one, let's just get into a basic example. I'm just going to create a module. So we have a working space. So straight line depreciation. We'll put it into fixed assets, and we're going to give ourselves an annual time series. We're going to look at this on an annual basis just to keep it simple. We can do the same approach to monthly or a similar approach for monthly, but we're just going to look more high level so we understand the flows of everything. So if we start with our basic approach using amounts, what we would do is, so for example, if we start setting it out for ourselves, let's give ourselves an asset, and then this asset, so for example, so we'll call it capital expenditure. We are then going to purchase that item in 2024. There's obviously complexities beyond this, because it's when do you purchase in the year? Is it mid-year, end of year, start of year? For simplicity, let's just assume start of year and the depreciation starts to occur in that period. So we'll depreciate the first instance in the first period. But yeah, like stuff like that, you do want to consider if you're getting into more detailed modeling. But if we give ourselves that starting point for amounts, what we need to start thinking about is the depreciation. So the first instance, to keep it super simple, you might do something like, okay, 100,000, we know that the useful life is 5 years. So maybe we will annotate down and have a useful life assumption in years. Different standards dictate differently how you notate things, but we just try and keep it simple. As long as things are labeled, I think that's a key part. Some standards force you to label put labels and basis in certain columns, but as long as a label is clear, then like a label needs to tell you what the item is, ideally what the basis is. So whether you're looking at it on an annual, per annum, so if it's interest rates per annum, if it's revenue growth year on year. As long as we try and be clear about our labeling, we're generally okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to put our useful life here and trying to follow at least basic principles of keeping assumptions outside of formulas. In the next step, we'll solidify this by ensuring that this is all a calculation and it's very clearly delineated. But I'm going to break the rules a little bit because for most people that don't have Medano, this will be what you do in an Excel file. So yeah, if you style your cells, we've got green as inputs, white background fill as outputs. We're going to assume that it's a 5-year effective life. And what we'll do is we'll just go, okay, 100,000 as the figure divided by 5, and we can work out our annual depreciation. For those advanced modelers out there, they'll probably say, oh, that is inflexible, not robust. And yeah, you'd probably be right. But it just demonstrates the point. We want 100,000 amortized or depreciated over 5 years on an even basis. And we just want to make sure that the total of our depreciation equals the total of what we spend in capital. We shouldn't have overs and unders there. So that's just the basic amounts method. What we're going to now do is take that up a level. Let's call it straight line depreciation formula. So we're just going to drive this by formula. We're going to put it into fixed assets as well. Now, if we do capital expenditure, so again, trying to build a bit more robustness in what we're trying to achieve here. We're going to allow ourselves the capital expenditure, so how much to spend. Again, we are going to make a useful life in years assumption. And now this step, we're trying to build it so that we can put layers over the top. So for example, in this example here, we would need to manually add in any new capital expenditure. So for example, in 2026, if we spent another 100,000, what we would need to do is then manually add that 100,000 to our original formula. So there we go, plus that. Now we have the 40,000 in those periods, carry that out, but then we need to finally carry that final formula into our final 2 periods. Not efficient, not something I would do, and not something I would recommend. But again, we just want to see the numbers that we would expect to get. So it helps us to get a starting point for sense checking whether our automated calculations are working appropriately. So again, useful life, 5 years. What we're going to do, for those familiar with Medano, is add in a block. So just what a block represents is just a consistent set of formulas. So that's why using Medano is quite good in practicing to build models in arrays or in a consistent output. We're going to a consistent set of calculations, sorry. So what we're going to do is we've got our depreciation, we've got our total depreciation, and we have our yearly outputs. Now, each year or each row represents a separate starting year. So for example, year one represents depreciation or capital expenditure starting in year one. And this is starting to probably look like a waterfall of depreciation that a lot of people are probably used to. What we're going to do is we're just going to give ourselves a helper. Some people might put this straight into the index match calculations, but I do like to try and keep matching and lookup references outside of any final indexation or lookups. It allows me to be a bit tidy with and not also be a bit more efficient with formula building, because then we can make sure that the Excel is not recalculating every index match. Something we can touch on in another video. But what we'll do is we'll build us a rows 24 to 24. This is ensuring that we have our referencing to the year. So year one references items starting in year one. So if we just expand, we can just double check that reference. We also are wanting to use that reference now to index in our values. So if I go index, I will index that section and I will lock that. And I will give it the row number. So basically, it would help if I do that correctly. So index in, lock, and we will reference in our helper. So what we are doing here is if we want to put 100,000 in year two, we are wanting to make sure that the year two figure goes into the correct year row. So it's a bit of translating our capex into our rows. Now, once we've got that, this is the point where we can start building our depreciation waterfall. So for example, again, we're still going to want to take the full amount that we've incurred in that year, and we're going to take that figure and spread it out over the useful life. So again, as you can kind of see with my formula building, I like to kind of break the process of building a formula out. So in this example, the first step I'm going to take is just build my useful life. Ideally, like these are styled as numbers, so you can't see the percentages. But once we multiply in our values, we'll be able to see the actual equivalents. So yep, we've got 20,000 a period. Obviously, this is overstating because we're repeating the full amount over the full time series. We haven't put boundaries yet. It's just making sure that we're dividing by and applying the right yearly depreciation. Great. Now that we know that, we then bound out all the values that aren't relevant to the calculations. So for example, in the first period, we're expecting values from year one through to year five, because your useful life is in the first period up to period 5, and then anything post that is not part of it. In the second year, the first year would be not part of the useful life calc, because we're starting in the second year. Third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and then anything after that would be outside the useful life. Commonly when I model, I will actually do the bounding first. So I'll do if my lower boundary, upper boundary, or initial conditions that are used to eliminate first. And then I go if that, then 0. And then I leave the end calc or the end of my if statements to actually represent the calculation, so that if we were to run an audit on the calcs, you would look at that last false item to work out what we're actually, like the actual calculation, but then all the steps before that determine the bounding of what the actual calculation is. So often I actually start with the bounding first, then I get to my actual calculation. But in this case, we just did the calculation first, whichever order sort of suits you, depending on the complexity of the formula, maybe depending on maybe you want to clear out all of the items first before you get to the formula. It just depends. So in this instance, we've done the formula first. We know that our useful life, so we're looking at 1/5 or 20% per year of the full value is to be depreciated, so the total value that we need to recognize in the period. So what we're going to do is we're needing to exclude all the periods outside of that. So in row 1, anything that's 6 and beyond, exclude. In row 2, that's starting year 2, anything that's less than 2 or greater than 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, greater than the 6, we need to exclude. So if we start with our upper bound and we go, all right, we have our top figure subtracted by our row reference, so the starting year, and anything that is greater than or equal to our useful life, we want to make sure that we exclude those numbers. So we zero those out and then leave us with our calculations. So great. Year 1, we have 20, 20, 20, 20, 20. So over 5 years, we've got 100,000. Year 2, we've obviously got too many. But we want the second year starting. So now we just need to deal with our left side or starting parameter. So I might just throw in another 100,000 just so we can see that a bit more plainly or a bit more clearly. Now, a few ways to do this. You can nest the ifs, you can min-max, there's plenty of ways to formulate this, wrap it around an and. I'm just going to keep this simple and just do an or check. So, if or something is too early or something is too late, zero that. Anything else within that we'll calculate. That's just what I'm choosing in this case, but obviously multiple ways to do it. So the next part, we need to then exclude anything that is too early. So if we take our current period, we then take away our referencing again. And then anything that is less than 0, excuse me, we want to exclude. So for example, and the reasoning there is we're looking at the current year that we're wanting to address, the year reference for the row, the starting year reference for the row. So if the current year is 1, starting reference is 1, the differential between the 2 is 0, so less than 0, exclude that. So in the second one, it creates a 0 or negative, exclude that. In the second period, we've got our starting reference, so 1 minus 2, you get -1. So again, we want to exclude that because less than 0. And then that gives us a nice, neat, and tidy summary, or not summary, calculation of our rolling figures or rolling waterfall depreciation figures in every period. So if we set these to be the same as our calculation above, 100,000 in 2024, 100,000 in 2026, we should find that 20, 40, 40, 40, 20, 20, 20. I think I said one too many 20, but anyway, I think you get the point. We get to the same manually calculated figures. So again, I reiterate, the first step was important. It was manual, annoying, but it allowed us to create a sense check to visibly understand what we're expecting to get from our calculation. And then that way, once we do our calculation, we can get to we can use that sense check to double check. Now, obviously, the benefit of doing it in this way is we've created an instance where if we change the useful life, so now 3 years, our formula automatically adapts and caters. So the 100,000 is now being depreciated over 3 years, so 1 in 3. So yeah, that's just one layer from basic or amounts into one layer of automation. And in the next video, we'll tackle the next layer using something within Medano called modules as categories, where we then layer on top of this, this whole section will be replicated to allow us then to create multiple instances of useful life for calculation, and to adapt that quickly and scale it up quickly. So it's one of the instances we like to use Medana, because it allows us to build that scale. And then the final step beyond that is looking at that reverse ticker formula that we talked about, that can take a lot of this stuff, all these waterfall rows, and then reducing that into a single or one or two row references. A lot more useful if you have a lot of capital items that need to be addressed with multiple layers of useful life. So yeah, hopefully this video has been useful in just giving some basic techniques around depreciation, around modeling. If you liked the video, please subscribe, leave a comment, let us know if we're creating the content that's useful for you in day to day, and that's hopefully insightful. Looking forward to speaking to you at the next video. Thanks again for attending. Cheers.